a handful of good public schools, but only in certain parts of the country that haven't been totally affected by radical left-wing curricula, then there's a good chance they're going to cultivate desires and they're going to be attracted to that grumpy old man who knows the difference between a man and a woman.
He's making a lot of good points here.
Hey, Smokey Mike. I am very pleased that my girlfriend and I drove about 4.5 hours to get here, so thank you for that.
My man, thanks for coming. I'm honored that you would do that.
So, looking back a few years ago, I would definitely consider myself a default liberal, and I think it has to do with my age. But noting that, why do you think that is? I think, to me, the reason a lot of younger people would fall into that camp is because the conservatives all came across as the old grumpy men, and the liberals were the fun people who liked everyone. It seems like a branding thing, but what do you think?
I think it's a little more insidious than that, because I think old grumpy men are cool. You know, I think Churchill chomping on a cigar, or I don't know, you know, some Popeye the Sailor Man or something. They're kind of cool guys. So why are young people attracted to leftism? It's because they've been trained to be attracted to leftism. I now live in the South. I fled my coastal enclaves that I was born and raised in and then lived in. I live in Tennessee. And I have a lot of friends with a lot of kids who were homeschooled, who attended classical schools and Christian schools, and these kids don't idolize blue-haired lunatics. You know, these kids are normal and they're well-adjusted and they like things that are worth liking and they behave in a way that is respectable and they look better and are just generally healthier, better adjusted people than you would find at your average slice of a public school in America. Well, what's the difference? The public schools are training them not only in facts, or in the case of many of those schools, falsehoods, but they're also training them in desires. That's what education does. Education cultivates appetites and desires. So if one is raised in a good church, in a good community, in a good homeschool or a good private school, or a handful of good public schools, but only in certain parts of the country that haven't been totally affected by radical left-wing curricula, then there's a good chance they're going to cultivate desires and they're going to be attracted to that grumpy old man who knows the difference between a man and a woman. However,
he's making a lot of good points here. I think it's important to know that, well, I'll say this. I don't know when this started, but the radicalization of education has always been pretty strange to me. And the reason I'm saying that is because it is kind of a leftist thing. And it wasn't happening so much when I was in primary school. But I'm seeing it more and more now, and I don't think it's the best for the children. And I'm really not even sure why it's happening. It's very strange. The fact that over time, schools are more radicalized, ideals are more left-leaning and just kind of insane. I really don't get it. But if anyone can enlighten me on why this is happening, I'll greatly appreciate it. But the fact that there has to be rallies where what he's saying is a conservative take, but in my mind, I'm like 10, 15 years ago, this wouldn't even have been conservative. This is just normal. You want your kids in a well-balanced school. It shouldn't be too far right-leaning. It shouldn't be too far left-leaning. But anyways, let's continue.
However, if they're trained from now younger and younger ages, in a curriculum that is cultivating a desire for disordered things, that's going to happen too. And habits are difficult to break. Habits, good and bad, are difficult to break, which is why the left is attempting to reach kids at younger and younger levels. And it's why you're seeing people with a little bit of a hangover. No longer do you see just 16-year-olds having a rebellious phase and piercing their ear or something, but now they're lopping off whole body parts, and now that will persist into their 20s and 30s. The deeper ingrained the habit is, the harder it is to break, which is why the left have focused on education so directly in the 60s, and it's why conservatives need to pay much more attention to it now.
Thank you again.
Thanks for coming. Thanks for driving 4.5 hours, man. That's great.
Hello, Michael. One thing I wanted to ask you about was you criticized the expansion of the divorce laws after a certain point. As I understand, and maybe I'm wrong, the divorce was previously permitted only for adultery, but then it was expanded for say, abuse or breakdown of relationship. Can you expand why you think this is bad, why that expansion is a negative to families and to marriages?
I think your premise is a little off, and I'm not saying you intended for it to be so, but you actually asked me a version of the typical gotcha question, which is, sir, do you still beat your wife? I am not in any way defending domestic abuse or anything like that. But when I talk about the radical expansion of divorce laws, I'm not talking about expanding permission from adultery to some other even more insidious ailment of a marriage. I'm speaking of no-fault divorce. No-fault divorce is an incoherent notion.
No-fault divorce. I don't know a lot about divorce rights and divorce laws and all those type of things, but I do know what the term no-fault divorce means. It to me is like you don't really have a real reason for divorcing your partner that you can write down and say, okay, this is the reason. The thing about that is that when you get married, you are signing a contract. My thing is this. Nobody forces people to get married. You don't have to get married to someone if you aren't 100% sure. So when you have the term no-fault divorce, it just kind of tells me that you may be rushed into the marriage. I don't know. I don't know. But the fact that that's like one of the leading causes of divorce in America is just kind of insane.
That two people can agree before the community and before God and to one another to remain until death do they part, and then just break that and have that not be anyone's fault. It is by definition somebody's fault, and very likely it would be both of their fault. No-fault divorce is a radical idea. The left has made it into something of a sacrament now, just as they've made abortion into a sacrament. But it's a rather new concept. In fact, New York, my home state, one of the most liberal states in the country, did not have a no-fault divorce law until 2010. Okay, until about 14 years ago. So this is pretty radical stuff. It's totally incoherent. And it's really terrible, not only for kids, but for society as a whole, because certainly for the spouses and for society as a whole, because the marriage is the fundamental political unit. So no one is suggesting that in some extreme case, a threat to one's safety or life or something like that, separation wouldn't be called for. It wouldn't even be the responsible thing to do. But people are pointing out that frivolous divorce, the notion that one can just dissolve a bond, the key bond in society, willy-nilly, that's gone way too far. And the downstream cultural effects of that, I think we're still realizing. I think you'll find that most of the people who are suffering from many of the social pathologies around us today, the 30% of Gen Z that identifies as LGBT, LMNOP, I think you'll find a disproportionate number of them come from broken homes. You can't crack the fundamental political unit without cracking society. So my position, I don't think it's an extreme position, is, hey, maybe we should be a little more careful about splitting up the basic unit of politics. I mean, frankly, it's more extreme and destructive than splitting the atom, because it's the social atom, it's the political atom. That's my only suggestion, and basically everyone in the world agreed with me until like 40 years ago. And things haven't gotten much better in the last 40 or 50 years, so maybe we ought to go back to the old way, which worked better.
So would you say the individual right to, if you're in an unhappy marriage, the individual right to seize that marriage is less important than the social need for it to continue?
No, I don't think there's an individual right to do wrong. I mean, at a very basic level, if you sign a contract and agree to something, you don't have a right to break that. So that would be true in a business arrangement. That would be true if you sign a lease for your apartment. And I think that would certainly be true when you're making what I at least consider to be a holy covenant, but at the very least it's a political agreement between two people that will produce children, or it's at least ordered in principle to produce children, who will be the fallout for that. We now pretend that all sorts of disordered behaviors are some kind of right, the right of a man to use the women's bathroom or something. But those aren't really rights because wrongs aren't rights.
What I'll say about that is, he makes a good point. I would say you are able to dissolve things like contracts and leases. However, there are punishments to dissolving these type of things. And in this instance, when it comes to no fault divorce, there are technically no true punishments that I can think of off the top of my head that you will have to go through in such case. But anyways, let's continue.
You can say one more, yeah.
So, if someone wants to end the marriage because they're unhappy about whatever it may be, that should not be permitted, even if it, say, the marriage is disruptful to the child's well-being. How could a child be raised in a marriage between two partners that don't want to continue to love each other?
Yeah, I think they should grow up and live up to their promises and act like adults for the good of their children and society. I don't think that's so crazy. Sometimes you'll hear this line that it's actually better for children when the parents are divorced. And that is complete cope from parents who get divorced. That is just not true at all. Because at a fundamental level, even if you're not religious, I'm religious, I'm Catholic. And so I think that it is not possible as a matter of sacrament actually to dissolve a marriage. I think that what God has joined, no man can separate. But even if you're not religious at all and you don't believe in any of that stuff, just as a very practical matter, socially, you can't get divorced. You can't ever really separate from your spouse, especially if you have kids, because you're going to be dealing with child support payments. You're going to be dealing with visitation. You're going to be figuring out who gets the kid for Christmas and who gets the kid for Thanksgiving. Which week the kid is going to be living in daddy's house, which week he's going to be living in mommy's house. You're going to be probably speaking to your spouse more than you were when you were just sort of miffed at each other living under the same roof. It's practically impossible, certainly if you have children as well, because there is a living representation of the love that once existed between the two of you. And so I pity people who don't like their husband or don't like their wife, and I'm sure that's a very unpleasant situation, and there are different ways to remedy that. But that does not justify breaking your vows, screwing up your kid's life, and fundamentally undermining the political order. Sorry, go to therapy and figure it out, guys.
Technically, he makes a good point. You probably will be communicating with them more, I guess, after the marriage if you have children. Children just, they bind you forever. But anyways, if you have any suggestions, comment down below. It's LFR Jojo, and I'll talk to you guys later.